Starting with the weakest shadow in Sun Jingwoo's arsenal, naturally we would have Kaizel. With this shadow, of course, being so low for specific reasons, he would undoubtedly be a shadow that would be used for mostly transportation when it comes to Sun Jingwoo. In this aspect, Kaizel would stand out above all other shadows because he would be one of the only shadows that could actually help Sun move around and get to any specific location without having to use one of his most convenient abilities, Shadow Exchange, which would allow him to change places or travel to a specific place just as long as there is a shadow already there. So of course, in order to get into a location he would have to plan and have his shadow already be there, which makes as a good shortcut. But rather than using this, he can use Kaizel, which would be a shadow at hand, but with the combination of Shadow Exchange, he can already have Kaizel be at any location and teleport directly to him, which gives him insane mobility options, and Kaizel would even help Jinwoo in any single fight by having him gain access to the air where his other shadows fail to actually reach. Kaizel would even be able to actually have other shadows ride on its back, such as Egress, making, just like I mentioned before, shadows that can't reach the sky actually make it into the air. And with the combination of two shadows, Kaizel would make the potential for every other shadow on this list that much better, because when fighting an airborne enemy, any of the shadows themselves, and not only just Sun Jinwoo, would use Kaizel to take down the occasional opponent. But alas, Kaizel would really just be this low because Kaizel would be nothing more than an elevator, a plane if you really want to go that far, but really, he's just a transportation object. Kaizel is not really supposed to be meant for fighting, and its best foot forward would be flying through the air and doing just that. 10 times out of 10, Kaizel on its own will die in a fight, earning it this placement on the list. Next, we would have Tank, which would be otherwise known as a Shadow Beast or Shadow Bear. I like Shadow Bear a lot, but that's besides the point. Tank would be a literal tank, and it comes as no surprise given its name and the roots of solo leveling being so tied to a video game. Just like a video game tank, Tank would be a tank and go against a lot of damage, being able to pummel through armies of enemies on its own, which would allow it to have the strength to allow Sun Jingwoo to take advantage of the strength of this enormous bear to not only use this as another mobility option, although it would mainly be grounded, he would be able to run through armies of different demons like they're nothing. Given his knight rank status, which is granted to him later on in the story, he would have the same ranking as Kaizel. However, he can actually fight, which puts him on a different standing than Kaizel. But of course, the biggest disadvantage here in comparison to Kaizel would be the fact that Tank cannot make it in the air. But he would make up for that with many different factors, with Sun Jingwoo being able to summon multiple bears at once. So yes, he can easily make an army of a single entity that would be able to destroy an army by itself. That being said, one bear would be enough to take down an army. Now he would have multiple army killers in his arsenal that can be used all at once, making Tank one of the most viable assets in the earlier areas of solo leveling. Tank would be a powerful yet slower beast when it comes to fighting, yet he would be able to suffer greatly when countered by an ability that would make it so that the tank itself cannot regenerate fast enough. So the way to counter this monstrosity would be to fight it with overwhelming speed to kill it faster than it can actually regenerate its own body. But that's going to be easier said than done if you're fighting an army of these things on your own. Now we would have Iron, which would be a shadow that would heavily be influenced by a defensive fighting style. However, this does not stop this shadow from being used strategically in the slightest. All thanks to Sun Jinwoo's battle experience, he would put a lot of different experimentation into practice, and Iron would definitely be a good example of this. As we know, he would like to fight head on, yet Iron would allow him to do just that and then some. Whenever he uses his skill, the Shout of Provocation, even a dungeon boss would fall into a state of rage, all because of Iron's Shout, which gives Jinwoo the opportunity to find himself an opening to attack a boss that has been manipulated by their emotions. Iron wouldn't be the smartest shadow by a long shot, especially when he's fighting on his own, but with enough strategy and control from the user of this shadow, the door of possibilities opens a million times over. Iron would catch up to opponents that severely outclass him in terms of speed, yet when he finally gets his hands on these same enemies, they would never be able to escape his grasp because he would have that much strength backing him and the opportunity to sacrifice himself to take down some of the toughest opponents yet. Even when taking some of the most powerful attacks head on, he would find himself somehow surviving due to his durability, and we're not even taking into account the use of his most powerful weapon, but I guess you wouldn't technically call it a weapon. His most worthwhile asset would be his shield. With his shield being able to block attacks from even the likes of Vulcan, with that being one of the lower level enemies that would throw Sun Jingwu into a life or death state practically. Iron would be one of the biggest reasons as to why Jinwoo would survive this fight at all, with his shield being able to block the attacks from this massive monstrosity. Oddly enough, Iron himself would not be able to block one of Vulcan's attacks, but with the equipment of the shield itself, Iron can throw this same shield to Jinwoo at a moment's notice and allow him to have the defensive buffs in order to survive attacks that would more than likely kill him. Iron would take an attack from Vulcan and then end up getting squashed like a bug, but with the shield in Jinwoo's possession, because of his strength stats alone, he can somehow block this same attack by Vulcan. You could easily argue about Iron's weakness, but nothing you can take away from him is the potential he has to stop any and every attack coming his way, and how he will be able to push through any situation with enough strength to boot. Iron can win a fight. His rank would be the main thing that would hold him back, with his rank being that of an elite knight. Anything that can be higher than that would easily destroy him. His level would be the only thing actually holding him back, yet with a 50% buff to all of his damage, Iron could still hold his own in some of the fights where he would actually pose as the underdog. But there are a few weaknesses that would hold him back and keep him from really winning. And this would be the very fact that with anyone being a higher ranking than him, his skill known as the Shout of Provocation would have no effect on specific enemies, so a layer to his strategic fighting style would be lost. Any enemy that is just higher than him would ultimately humble Iron to a point where he might just be useless, with the likes of Thomas Andre being able to dismiss Iron completely, which is to be expected. Now we would have Jima. Jima would have the rank of an elite knight, which would be the same as Iron. But what puts Jima higher than Iron on this list, despite Iron having a lot of strategical advantages and amazing defense to boot, it's the fact that Jima can turn into any size, making him completely become an enormous kaiju that can destroy buildings like it's nothing and crush enemies as if they're not even there. By simply walking, he can kill, well, more likely in this case slithering, he would crush anyone, and even the biggest opponents would be in fear of Jima because Jima can just increase his size to a point where he can become larger than most giants. And one of the biggest assets to this is the very fact that he can summon both of his tridents to allow him to have reach over every single one of his opponents, and he can stab them to death easily. Now, Jima would be stated to have an enormous amount of mana, but Jima itself would be probably as strong as Tusk through Jinwoo's own words. Now, whether or not he's stronger than Tusk is definitely debatable, but I'm gonna leave that up to you guys for your own interpretation. Actually, there is a reason that we're going to dig into later. With that being said, Jima is a powerhouse in his own right, giving him capabilities to destroy all of the enemies that can squash Jinwoo at a moment's notice. Since you made it this far in the video, make sure to like the video and also subscribe to the channel, and if you really feel like it, join the Patreon so that we can continue making more content. Links to that will be in the description and pinned comment down below. However, Tusk should be above Jima when it comes to power ranking, and a whole lot more, because not only would Tusk be able to have an enormous amount of mana, but he would be able to change his size to an insane degree, letting him also fight giants just like Jima. So in a way, you could look at Tusk as if he's a glorified version of Jima, but more focused on the magic sense of fighting rather than brute force. But even then, Tusk would have enough firepower to easily take down just about any opponent. Unlike Jima, Tusk would have a lot more depth when it comes to his fighting styles, and he would have similar abilities to Jima himself. It would be pretty crazy to think about Jima actually taking Tusk down, because Tusk would obliterate Jima in every sense of the word. Just like Jima, he can just turn giant and also overwhelm him with just the use of his magic alone, and this isn't even taking into consideration if he uses the Orb of Avarice. With both Jima and Tusk being elite knight ranks, literally through sheer ability and potential alone, Tusk will just mop the floor with Jima, with one of his most famous combination of abilities being increasing his size and then using the Hymn of the Fire Dragon, which easily destroys buildings that come into contact with it, but its range is in an insane degree that allows it to leave an island only to travel into the skies above without a trace. This same attack would save Sung Jin Woo's life from the Demon King himself by allowing Tusk to collide with his energy beam attack, stopping it from ever making contact with his master. And this is easily just one of his spells. He can even use gravity acceleration, which of course is gonna cause anyone he fights to eat dirt. There's no way you're really even gonna fight someone that can use gravity powers, let alone even think about touching them. So that alone, with just 2 abilities, will put Tusk in a different league, and he has way more than just those. Jima is not even going to be able to come close to fighting Tusk, let alone any of the other shadows that were mentioned in the video before. He would have another ranged attack, and this would destroy armies in seconds, with it being the Hymn of Blazing Fire, which would destroy anyone that comes into contact with it by creating numerous explosions that will leave no survivors behind. And of course, this is just his destructive power alone. He would also have the Hymn of Protection, which would create a shield around anyone and anything that he wants. Tusk has an amazing amount of buffs and debuffs, and he would also be able to blind anyone he's fighting, and so he would have probably some of the best versatility I've seen in a shadow so far, earning him this spot on the list. Here we would have Greed, but to be honest, not much can really be said about the shadow life of this character because he doesn't really get too much screen time. But with that being said, there's a reason why he would completely outclass every single character on this list that has shown up before, because unlike them, he would be at a completely different level in terms of rank, making him a general. His ranking alone would be more than enough to allow him to surpass every other shadow on the list, and not only this, there are a few feats where he actually displays his strength when being trapped in the ice prison of the Frost Monarch, where everyone else would have failed to exit the same ice prison. He would simply flex and destroy the entire prison that he was trapped in, making him able to have the opportunity to fight alongside Beru and the rest of the Shadow Army when it came to taking down the Monarchs. Greed would have a clear desire to kill alongside immense strength, which would put him up against the Frost Monarch, but he wouldn't be able to break through this same Monarch's shield. Even so, Monarchs are in a completely different league, so it's understandable. With the combined power of Greed and Beru, they would both be able to deal a massive blow of damage to the Monarch of Destruction. To have enough physical strength alongside one of the strongest shadows inside of the army, I do think Greed can easily hold his own when it comes to a practical fistfight or display of strength itself. I think it's definitely impressive, even though with the help of Beru, that he was able to deal such a massive attack on the Monarch of Destruction. Because despite being such a lower rank than Beru and Egress, he was still able to make a difference in this same fight against the monarchs. Getting into the upper echelons of the list, we would have Igris, with him being one of the very first shadows that Sung Jin-woo would ever extract. Igris would be undoubtedly the best swordsman inside the entire Shadow army, at least until we have one of the strongest shadows to ever show up. Igris' swordplay would save Jin-woo's life time and time again. Really, it would be hard to imagine this entire adventure without this character. Igris would easily take down ogres as if they're not even in front of his face by charging his blade and turning them all into mincemeat with a bunch of simple sword slashes. With such precision and accuracy behind every single swing of his sword, it's easy to see why he would be considered the best swordsman in the army. He would even have enough flexibility and balance to completely dodge attacks that would kill the average Joe. Igris would be able to balance on his sword and get the advantage on anyone trying to approach him. His movement and intelligence is nothing to scoff at in the slightest. He is a shadow that I think a few would easily underestimate, especially considering that he took a beam to the face from the Demon King, which isn't all that much a good look, but even while battling against the ants in one of the most dire moments of the series, he would crush an ant with just the force of his hand alone. But one of the greatest aspects about this character would be the sword itself, with him obtaining the Demon King's longsword, which gives him a 350 attack boost alongside the effect of the storm of white flames, allowing him to summon a violent thunderstorm in any specific area. Not only this, but every time he swings his sword, he would have the effect of the storm of the white flames, leaving a storm behind every single swing of this sword. Armies and buildings would easily be swept away by a single swing. Even though he may be disadvantaged by not being able to traverse the air by needing the help of Kaizo, even with that being said, with the necessary traversal to take down anyone, he would be able to really use his power to its greatest advantage. By swinging his sword, he would shoot a massive amount of energy that would cut through his opponents, which gives him the potential to fight with ranged combat all the while using a sword. He would even be able to hold off the Monarch of Frost all by himself, causing the Monarch of Frost to even feel uncomfortable when facing one of his sword swings. The fact that he would make a Monarch even sweat while being nothing more than a mere shadow, but he would be an amazing asset when it comes to holding off most opponents until Sung Jin-woo gets the opportunity to finally find himself in a position where he can actually fight his truest opponent. Igris' cold and calculated fighting style is one of the many reasons as to why Sung Jin-woo has made it so far in the story at all. Much like Igris, this next shadow has come a long way, with this shadow being Beru. He'd be the only other shadow to share the same rank as Igris, but Beru would stand out in many ways. Where Igris is cunning and precise, Beru would be the exact opposite, and this would be to his greatest benefit. Tenacity alone was enough to allow Beru to reach the marshal rank when he was originally a general, where Igris would need Kaizel just to make sure that he can fight an airborne opponent. Beru would simply just be able to fly with the use of his own wings, letting you understand that Beru can already fight in another dimension in comparison to Igris. Not only this, but he would not just possess healing magic, but his fighting spirit and willpower alone would carry him through the worst of situations. When being inside of the Frost Monarch's prison, he would be the first shadow to actually break out of it, almost instantaneously, I might add. However, what really gives Beru the greatest standing ovation in comparison to most shadows is the fact that he would be able to take on a numerous amount of monarchs, having cut off the fingers of the Monarch of Plagues, and this monarch would actually be a counter for Beru, yet with just sheer willpower he would fight her back. She would be known as the mother of all insects, and he would not allow her to control him, even though it's in his nature to follow her will. Yet Beru would go against these odds. It would even get crazier when it comes to him fighting the monarchs, because he would be able to take on the Steel Monarch all by himself. he would only be even more impressive because with the Frost Monarch's strongest attack that he could muster, Beru would fly through his ice glacier and smash it with his own hand. Unlike most shadows, Beru was able to hold his own against multiple monarchs by himself, and this just goes to show where he really stands when it comes to power in comparison to other shadows. Beru would even be the only shadow to challenge the strongest shadow in a battle. Even with his swift defeat to this shadow, Beru would still be one of the most impressive assets to the Shadow Army. Finally, we would have Bellion, who would be the strongest shadow in all of existence, with him possessing a sword that would be way bigger than Igris could even imagine picking up, and his specialty would be strength rather than speed. But really, what allows him to set aside any disadvantage by splitting his greatsword into that of a whip. Bellion's sword would not only be slow and bulky, but it would also be fast and flexible, giving him the chance to fight any kind of opponent in his way, making it so that even though he may prefer a slow fighting style, the fastest opponents would not be able to take advantage of that, letting Bellion restrain Beru with ease, taking down Beru in an instant. All three of Bellion's personal dragons would be able to wipe off every human from the planet. Just one of them would be able to do this, and he would have three that would be in his possession. How do you beat him? Well, the answer is actually really simple. You don't. Bellion would be the strongest shadow in all of existence, and you wouldn't have to think twice about it. Thanks for watching the video. Make sure to check out these two other videos showing up on your screen. If you like this one, you're definitely gonna love the other ones.